Hello and welcome to Building a Professional Network for Service and Career. I'm Andy King with the Corporation for National and Community Service, and I'll be your host for this session. Joining me today are our partners, Bethany DeSoplin from Education Northwest and Sam Graziani from JBS International. You'll see us in the chat and Q&A to assist you during today's session and to help get your questions answered. We're delighted to have with us today Denise Reedman. Denise served as an AmeriCorps Vista member in 1994 and 95 at the Denver Indian Center in Denver, Colorado. Denise is now the Director of Career Development and Alumni Services for the Trachtenberg School of Public Policy and Public Administration at the George Washington University here in Washington, D.C. Denise also does private career coaching through CareerHappinessCoach.com. Denise is an active member of AmeriCorps alums, and she serves as the official coach for AmeriCorps alums, their official career coach, I should say. Here's what we hope you'll get out of today's session. By the end of the webinar, we'd like you to be able to identify why a network can have such far-reaching impact both in your career and in your service. We hope you'll be able to set some personal goals for cultivating relationships, and then you'll develop some strategies to help you meet those goals using both online and offline networks. Our agenda for today will start out looking at why it's important to have networks, and then give you some questions that you can ask yourself, both to assess your own personal goals and then to look at the landscape of both your professional field and the organization where you're currently serving. We'll share with you a number of online resources and also ways that you can establish connections offline through face-to-face and individual meetings. So now, I'd like to turn things over to Denise Reedman. Denise?
Great. Thank you so much, Andy, for inviting me back to talk about this. I love this topic, and as a Vista alum, I love talking to other Vistas. As we were talking earlier while everybody was logging on, it's one of these things that for all of you that are doing service now, this gets in your blood and never leaves, so I love this. So let's get started. These are often the images that people think with networking. I'm sure that a lot of you have seen things like this or feel this way about this. It's often seen as this like necessary evil, unsavory, not fun. The word networking just seems to be fraught with negative terms. It doesn't need to be. When I started to work on this training, I was like, let me look at what alternative words are for networking on the thesaurus. And this is what I saw. Well, no wonder people have such a negative view. I mean, look at this. Hobnob, schmooze, rub elbows. These all have a very negative connotation. So then I looked on the dictionary, and I was more heartened to see this, because this is really what this is about. And it's not about networking. It's about building a network of people, of shared interests, common goals, a community. So this is really the focus and how I view building a network. And I actually view it not necessarily as network, but really building career capital, which is not about landing a job. And I know for a lot of people that is one key element, particularly now if you're doing service and you're thinking about, within your service that you're going to be, needing to find work. But it's more than that. Most of you in this field are looking to really have an impact. So it's about how you connect and learn with people, how you cultivate relationships, known for your expertise, foster influence to make an impact around causes you care about. It's about knowing leaders, knowing funding. So if we can think about this today as more than just an immediate transactional relationship, but more as a transformative way that you are shifting how you see yourself and the impact in this world. So let's dig in a little bit deeper around this concept called an open network. Multiple peer-reviewed studies have shown that being in an open network accounts for half of the predicted difference in career success. This is around promotion, compensation, industry recognition. What does an open network mean? It means that you're connected in a lot of different groups. It means that you're having conversations with people and you can see what this opens up to you. It opens up a new lens of seeing things beyond with what's right in front of you. So this is why these conversations are more than just, oh, I need to talk to this person because they know somebody at this organization I want to work at, but rather I want to be a connector. I want to have creative breakthroughs. I want to partner with somebody who's doing work in a different way, and maybe if we leverage our organizations together, new solutions can become about. I also want to talk about this concept of wired for connection. And I think that it helps when people understand why building these relationships tends to bring out some fear in people. So we are wired to connect with people. Neanderthal humans, we needed community to survive. We're actually not that far advanced from our brains in that way. Social isolation or group rejection usually meant you wouldn't survive. So, our brains are wired in this way, except now it doesn't matter whether or not you're not going to survive, but it does impact your ability to thrive. So by nature, these kinds of situations, they touch on an emotional part of our brain. So this actually can trigger anxiety and fear. So it's a natural reaction. I think understanding that natural reaction for people is really helpful to know that this is, everybody comes up with this. So what you can do is come up with and think about rational strategies for dealing with these networking situations, whether at a conference, event, informational interview. This is what we're going to focus on today. And hopefully just understanding this is part of our wiring, that when you're feeling this nervousness, doesn't mean something's wrong with you or you're deficient or you don't know enough, but it's your wiring, and the more tools you have to work with this enables you to feel more comfortable for this thriving. So why is this all important? In this job market, and this is a new study by JobVite, 78% of recruiters find their work candidates through referrals, through relationships with other people. This is obviously, I know, one of the prime motivators for people in networking is landing jobs. So this statistic shows you how important it is to build your network to be able to, get in front of the right hiring manager. The other big fear that comes up is people are concerned about asking people for help. This study came out, and I think this is incredible, and this is Harvard Business School and Wharton, that when people ask people for help, they actually think more highly of you. They think you're more competent. People often say, oh, what are people going to think if I'm asking them questions? I'm new in my career. They're so much more older and experienced. They view you more highly. So remember this next time you're thinking to ask for help. So here's the situation we've all been in. We're at an event, we get the business card, and then, oh my gosh, what do we do? Going back to that Neanderthal brain thinking, two common responses are flight, I need to move on from this person, or freeze, I don't know what to say. Probably not the most effective way to build networking. So let's talk about what you can do to not have that flight or freeze moment. So first things first is, I always say, before you worry about what you know, who you know, you need to first know yourself, you need to know your organization, and you need to know this field you're working in. This enables you to go from having a flat relationship to one that's built on mutual benefits and connections. So first, in terms of knowing yourself, what does this mean? This is about your strengths, values, needs, growth, causes, competencies. This is about knowing who you are. Now, I'm not saying you need to have all these answers right away. This is a constantly dynamic and changing part of who you are, and you want to begin to start asking yourself these questions so that you, when you're in these situations, you know who you are. So what are some ways on how to do this? First and foremost, you want to assess yourself around some of these strengths. I'm going to be talking about some tools here. They're going to go in the chat feature, as well as, you'll have access to this webinar. I am aware there's a lot of information I'm going to convey during today's webinar. I'm going to try to convey it as slowly as possible so you can capture it all, but please know you can go back and get anything. There's formal assessments you can do, like Strength Finders, VIA assessment, MBTI, which is Myers-Briggs. There's one that's a free one. There's one that's just a cost, True Colors. Some of these things are just to help you get an idea of strengths and your preferences. It's not putting you in a box. It's giving you some ideas about who you are around assessment. Next is be aware. Notice what things you actually like to read, what things you're paying attention to, what events. I always tell people, notice what events you're at, that you're actually sitting there and time goes fast, and which ones you think you, quote unquote, should be there. I always tell people you have to watch and don't should on yourself. If you notice you're shoulding too much, it's not a good thing. You'll often notice that you're at those events and you're looking at your watch or on your phone. You know, be aware of what emails you get from which organizations that you actually read and which ones you delete, which LinkedIn groups you're paying attention to. The clues are often there, but it requires slowing down, being mindful of what's out there. And then the third piece of this is conversing with people. One of the key things about having informational meetings with people, talking to people at events, it helps you start to be aware, oh, I tend to like people who are in this line of work, or I really connect and like hearing about these kinds of things. You can ask people what some of your greatest strengths are. A tip I like to tell people, and I always tell them to blame it on me, is to put a note on your Facebook. You got lots of friends if you're out there, and say, you know, what would you say are my 3 greatest strengths? What phrases would you use to describe me? You're going to hear words that go beyond the cliched words that end up on everybody's LinkedIn and resume, and you're going to get a great sense of how you're perceived. It's a real ego boost, plus it helps you get an idea of what are you bringing out there. So that's the first thing about knowing yourself. So next, what do you need to know about your organization? Very similar than what we just talked about with yourself. What are the causes of your organization? What are their strengths? Where are they positioned? What's the core mission? What's the value? What's the competency? Different organizations or companies or agencies are known for different things. Have a sense of where your organization is positioned and get an understanding of that, and that's going to help you know where you are. This is going to help you build relationships, and when you're using networking to expand beyond just for a job, but how you're maybe partnering with another organization around a cause, you need to know what your organization is internally as well as its perception. So what are some ways to actually do this? Again, we're going back to the ABCs. First, assess. Internally, your organization, probably there are some 360-degree assessments that have happened, strategic plans, annual reports. Be aware. Notice where your organization, who they're partnering with, where they're putting their dollars and their time. Again, the information is there when we notice it. And finally, converse. Talk to people internally. If you're starting new in a VISTA role, talk to previous VISTAs. Go to the board, get external input. You want to actually, again, be aware from all the different directions of what the angle is of your organization. And then finally, this is in the whole portion of knowing yourself. What do you know about your field? Again, very similar, funding, hot issues, trends. You want to be aware of this. We've gone from ABC, let's go to DEF. You want to get out there, start going to events. Young professional events are a great way to tap in. Informational meetings. Be educated in your field, e-newsletters, Twitter feeds, articles. I know that there is an informational overload. We're going to talk a little bit more about how to manage that later, but make sure you're doing that. And finally, F, follow these organizations. Go to events, follow them on LinkedIn. All of these things, make sure you know the people who are, I always talk about following super connectors. Knowing the people, the organizations that are really the ones out there that can provide a macro level view helps you save you time and money because you're working with people who have a perspective. So when you start to do this, the next time you get the business card, you have a more robust answer. You actually are talking to them about shared common interests. So once you know that, it's really important to think about giving and receiving. Really critical to know that people who give, who share articles, 10 times more likely to be contacted by a recruiter. So make sure you're giving information. There's a great new book I suggest called Give and Take by Adam Grant from the Wharton School. It's just really interesting in this concept about people who are givers. Be willing to be receiving things and knowing that people want to receive. People actually want to do and help you. And then finally, you want to connect. As much as you can connect people, particularly when you're younger in your career as a young professional. That is a nice way to give, is by connecting people who are maybe above you with opportunities or connecting them to each other, even if you don't have resources for them. So we're going to talk now about the stages of relationship building that comes from an organization called Contact Counts. I think this is really helpful to think through the process within things. And their research shows it takes 6 to 8 contact points with someone before they know who you are. You might start at the accident stage where you just connect with them once and you might have to build hard to have a relationship with them, or it might not be. Then they can move into the acquaintance level. These are people you don't see regularly. You might find, again, if you wanted, they might be somebody who you knew through someone else. Then people can shift into the associate level. These might be people with the same joint group as you. You might see them over and over again. It doesn't have to be professional. They can be a part of your religious organization. They can be part of your alumni. People you see a lot, but maybe not all the time, and you're not super close to them. Next, you move into actives, which are people who you have a little bit closer relationship with them, kind of as accidents, acquaintances, and associates get a little bit closer. You're a little bit more active, a little bit more engaged with them. And this is just a nice way for you to think about your network, where people are. If you have the time, I would recommend putting some people in each of these, see where people are in them, and then hopefully seeing, do I have enough people in the advocates group? These are people who you really work more closely with. You seek each other out and say, hey, I have this project for you. I have a referral. I was at this conference. I think this is good organization for you. And finally, your allies. This is when people that you know really well. I like to think about people that are in this ally stage as like your board of directors of life. These are people you turn to when you need advice, when you're celebrating, when you need support, you have important decisions to make. They are really your strong group. Yeah, this is a smaller group. As you notice, the circle is smaller. Again, good way to start to think about, where are my relationships? Where do I need to focus on this? So how do you actually find people and build them in the relationship? Well, we know social media. We know it can make us all crazy. There's a wonderful resource and incredibly overwhelmed by it. I feel overwhelmed by it all the time. So for this workshop, there's definitely values in a lot of them. I wanted us to focus on the 3 primary ones that tend to be right now the most important ones for building a network. This report recently from JobVite came out and said these were the 3 primary ones that recruiters are going to be using. As you can see, 87% of them use LinkedIn, 55% in Facebook, and 47% with Twitter. So they're using this to recruit. I can't even go on and on with the stories I hear about how they're using this. And this is that hidden job market. 50% of jobs never make it to job boards. By tapping into social media, you are going to be connecting with them, and they're going to be connecting with you. Social media is a gold mine for recruiters. This is what they're looking for when they're looking at your profiles. So they dig in there. They pay for, particularly with LinkedIn, they pay a whole other side of LinkedIn and can see things that we can't see for them to search for things. So you can see what they're looking for and why social media matters. Okay, so we're going to start first with Twitter on how you can tap into this. Again, making sure we talked about this, following people, following recruiters. Look and see people who you know that are in the field and see who they're following. Make it easier. Use Twitter lists to manage this. Follow hiring managers and influencers. Again, knowing about trying to do return on investment, ROI. Focus on people that have the broadest reach. Next, listen. This is going to help you understand where the field is going. Where's the funding happening? Who's hiring? What's the latest news in the field? Particularly when you're working in a smaller community. I used to run a VISTA project in Maine, and this was pre-Twitter days. Yes, that's how old I am. This was before this came out. But it was so important up there for them to know in the local community and to read the local newspaper. Now you have Twitter to do this, to see what's happening. What are the hot issues in that community? Branding yourself, knowing how you are known, retweeting selectively. You don't want to be doing this all the time. Your message, your bio on Twitter. And then finally, what's the value? Answering questions, shouting out people. Again, selectively doing this, and you can slowly ramp this up. There's a lot of information I'm giving you today. I want you to remember, you're not going to be able to do all of this. All of this might not resonate with you. All of this might not be the area where you see yourself moving into. Think about the places that work with you. Some people love Twitter, and that might be what they want to pick up. So again, I just want to remind you today, think about what works for you. So this is a great question we'd love to put out there, and take some time to put in the chat box if there's some hashtags that you recommend that you use. One source that's on there around some great Twitter hashtags for job seekers, but also hashtags if you want to put in the chat feature that you know would be really helpful for people, say, in your line of work. So feel free to plug things on there, and these comments will be visible to everybody, and you'll be able to get this at the end so people can see what's going on. So again, on how you use Twitter, it can get you some real-time updates. Twitter, people are using them to post jobs, highlight events, selectively following the right time. And particularly with Twitter, it's very much real-time, so you know what's happening at that moment. Because a lot of larger organizations have somebody who's posting to Twitter every day, so you can hear the current news. You can really see, it helps you stay on top of the funders in a community. Places like GovLoop that aggregate larger topics. For example, GovLoop, if you're really interested in government opportunities, they aggregate this. They make your job easier for you. Nonprofit jobs, follow the ones in your community or across the country in your line of work so you can get a larger understanding of what's happening. And then places like Net Impact, if you're interested in social entrepreneur, social innovation, looking at those organizations so you know what's going on. And then make sure you're using Twitter lists to be able to manage things so you're not feeling overwhelmed and saying, forget it, it's too much, and shutting down. Okay, next on to Facebook. Now, I know Facebook, a lot of people use it primarily for social reasons. That's my own focus with this. I tend to focus on LinkedIn for professionally, but Facebook does have its role. So make sure you have a customized URL, that you're using status updates appropriately if you're thinking about using it on a professional level. Add or delete any photos that are not appropriate. Even if you're not using it for a professional level, they are going to look, and you don't know if that recruiter knows somebody that they can then access your Facebook page and be able to see things that you might not want them to see. So include professional details, like company pages. Some organizations are using Facebook to advertise information. Join the right events and groups you can hear about, and make sure your privacy settings. If you're not using it for professional reasons and you don't want people to see it, set your professional settings to show you in the best light possible. Even if you're not using your own Facebook page for professional reasons, think about it for using to stay connected with what's happening in your field. Again, similar to Twitter, knowing what's happening. Some organizations might be using both simultaneously, some might just be using Facebook. Find the right organizations and see which social media that they're using. So feel free, again, with the chat feature and to talk about how you are using Facebook to connect with professionals. Put your ideas in chat box over there, and make sure you send it out to all participants so everybody can see how you're using Facebook professionally for other ideas. Again, this might be working for you, but please feel free to share any ideas. You all have wonderful resources. I'm just one person. You all have tons and tons of resources, I'm sure, that are very helpful for others. Okay, let's move on to LinkedIn for staying on the online moment of building a network. This is still considered the most important when you're thinking about building your professional network. 300 million globally, 100 million in the U.S. Company page continues to climb, and 87% of recruiters use LinkedIn to find and vet candidates, both active and passive candidates. Again, the stories I could tell of people who have been found via LinkedIn for jobs they never were looking for, and they ended up making the switch because it was an incredible opportunity. So a couple things about LinkedIn, and I do want to remind you, this is not a LinkedIn workshop. I could spend an entire hour, probably a whole day, going into how to use LinkedIn for your profile. So I'm going to touch base quickly on this and then more focus on how to use it to build your brand. But it is important for you to think about making sure your brand on there is professional. Obviously, this is probably not the most picture that probably the nicest picture that you would want up there, so make sure you have an appropriate professional picture. There was a link someone put up there about why your LinkedIn photo is an epic fail. Definitely look at other people's photos, get advice on which one looks for you, one works well for you. This is a great example. The co-executive director of AmeriCorps alum, Ben Dudas' picture. It's professional and it's warm and welcoming. You're really having the nice smile in a photo. It's very clear. I often, when I set up networking meetings with someone and I don't know what they look like, I'm looking at their LinkedIn profile to see if I know them. Next, thinking about what your headline is. People don't realize that you can actually personalize this, and this goes back to the concept of building your brand and what's your message. Instead of having something like this, just a student, you could change it and actually say, oh, look, this is where my internship is. So that's one way to do it. A lot of people have their job, their current position or internship. But you can go further than that. You can actually tailor it to whatever way you want to send your message. It might be joint that it actually talks a little bit about your job title as well as other keywords you want included so recruiters can find you or people can see what your message is. Here's another way of doing it, nonprofit communications professional. Particularly, this is helpful all the time, and particularly when you're looking to make a transition or you're in between jobs. So think about that. You can very easily adapt that. Another thing people don't realize is that your link, your actual profile link, you can personalize it. LinkedIn automatically adds those numbers and just puts it in. All you need to do is just go into edit your profile and very quickly and easily do this. It looks much more professional. This can be included at the bottom of your signature line and on your resume. Okay. So we've talked a little bit about that. Again, I'm not going to go into more details about how to build your profile because we're focusing here on building your network, but there's a lot of great resources online on this. So how to build your connections through second and third degree. So it's really important to think about, this is a very common message that comes up on LinkedIn. There's one thing I want you to take away from here is please don't send this standard message. Please take the time to personalize a message. You really want to think about sending the person a note. That could probably take you 20 seconds to write. You could have a lot of different templates you copy and paste in, giving the context to somebody about how you know them and how you want to connect. Personalize the message, and it's quality over quantity. I'd rather you have fewer connections, even though the more connections you have, the more opportunities in second and third degree, but make sure they're quality connections. Use your alumni organization that goes under connections and find alum to find people in your area or your line of work. LinkedIn makes it super easy to find your connections through this. So that's one easy way to do it. And they'll make lots of suggestions on your homepage to find people. And then make sure you're managing them well. Once you connect with somebody, you have these options to manage. You can set up reminders. You can set up notes. You can notice how you met the person so you can remember, oh my God, I met them 4 years ago at this conference. You have a context for them. LinkedIn is a valuable tool for learning more about other organizations. They'll list also in the organizations, people also viewed similar organizations. It helps manage, particularly when you're doing a job search and saying there's so many organizations working in youth development. Oh, this organization is also working on literacy. So if you looked at the Room to Read page, it will show you, oh, Reading Partners, similar organization. KIPP, similar organization. It helps you manage the large amount of information out there. Also, you can find out how you're connected to people. You would be surprised by people that you're like, oh, didn't know that this person that I did PSO with is actually now with this organization. So let it help you find the people. It also is important for you, very, very similar to we talked about LinkedIn and Facebook, where people can update and you can read about reports, grant opportunities, conferences, see if they're hiring. Another valuable tool within LinkedIn is groups. Why is it important? Inside information, branding, you can connect. If you're a member in the group with somebody, you don't have to be connected with them to send them a message. You can actually go into your LinkedIn groups, go under members, search for, say, an organization you're interested in, see who comes up, and then the note will say send a message, and you can email them directly. You can ask and answer and discussion portion of the LinkedIn group. This gives you an opportunity to connect with people, to brand yourself, and again, you also hear about insider information. I was recently working with an HR recruiter who said she used to work with a small company that needed to do a massive amount of hiring. They didn't have the capacity, so they sent out messages via LinkedIn and Twitter about a small recruitment event they were having that only people in that network found out about, and they were very successful with hiring people who were already following them. Finally, no matter what site you use, please be aware of your social media footprint and the message you're sending out. You are responsible for your online brand. You need to monitor and be vigilant about what's out there. If you have a common name, think about using your middle name. Think about using your middle initial. Make sure you Google yourself as much as possible. You want to know what's coming up in searches for you. We're going to be putting a link up here. Oh, it just came through about how to monitor your brand online. These are 10 free ways to monitor your online presence. I had this happen once where someone had quoted me on their website, something that was not an appropriate quote. I would never have known unless I had been Googling myself. Now, I don't do it frequently. Maybe every couple months I might Google myself to make sure that the message of what's coming up on those first few pages is true to me. I'm not inappropriately connected to a site I don't want to be connected with. Again, the responsibility is yours, and HR is using this. People are using this. So finally within this, if there's any LinkedIn groups that you might recommend, please, again, put this into the chat box. If there's groups that are important, insider information, any groups that you would recommend, please feel free to share. Would love to have this resource within all of you. So we spent a lot of time talking about online. That is just one piece of it. It's an important, critical piece in this day and age. I like elements of the piece, but my favorite thing is being in person with people. So now let's take this offline and spend some time talking about this component, the offline component. First thing is the events that you're going to. Choose wisely with the events you're going to. Really think about what resonates with you. I'm not a fan of generic networking events. I'm a really big fan of events that are part of something I believe in, that are a talk, a volunteer event, that I feel more authentic at it. There's nothing worse than showing up at an event and not feeling good and not feeling authentic. When you're new, go with other people. If you don't have other people to go with, one big thing I always recommend, see if you can volunteer. I went for a Mindful Leadership Summit last week. Not only did I get to go for free, but I volunteered at the event, which gave me a chance to connect with people and had a job to do, so I didn't feel uncomfortable there. And I've been out in the work world for 20 years, and I still get uncomfortable at things, so it gives me a chance when a place is new to volunteer at it. Particularly if you can volunteer for the registration table, because then you can see who's there. You're balancing work and life, and you might not be able to go. If you need to go and you not find out the networking is before, arrive early and leave early. Or if the networking's after, maybe you can go for half of the talk and then stay afterwards for the networking. So think about this strategically. People understand that. Obviously, if it's a certain event that you need to be there the whole time, this isn't appropriate, but choose that selectively. Also think about where you are in line if you're trying to talk to a speaker at an event. I prefer being one of the ones near the end because then there's not a pressure for people behind me. If you're one of the first ones in line, that's good, but just know that there's people behind you. The person could be fresher. I once spoke at an event and the person was so nice, they waited through the line and then they said, "Can I help you carry stuff to your car?" The guy made a connection with me. He was wonderful and helpful, and I was able to help him out. He was an AmeriCorps conference. And then having teaser conversations. Make sure you know what to talk to people about. And we're going to talk more about this. There's a couple strategies I recently found that I think are really helpful because I know this brings up a lot of nerves for people. This is a really great strategy that actually was through NPR's radio host, Marty Nemko, has this traffic light strategy. So when you're talking to someone, first 20 seconds, you get this green light. You're in, you're engaged, the listener is involved, but you've got about 20 seconds to kind of engage them. You're now going next, and you're into the yellow light. You have to be careful. You've got to watch the person. Are they starting to lose interest? Do they think you're long-winded? So what are you doing at this point, being aware? Then the 40-second mark, light is red. If you feel like there's a connection, keep talking. But most of the time, as he says, you're probably in danger and you might want to stop at this point to move on and think about, is this really the right conversation to be had? To be aware of this, what you want to do is be noticing them. A lot of times when you're really nervous, you're not noticing someone, you're not noticing if they're keeping to make eye contact with you, if they're engaged in the conversation. So this is a nice little strategy to think about, oh, where am I right now? How am I talking? Doesn't mean you need to be talking faster. You want to be reading and engaging the person. How do you read and engage? This is another strategy I found that I thought was fantastic. Match, shift, pass back. Okay? So how do you do this? Matching is the first stage. You're actually looking to see, oh, how am I making an initial connection with them? There's real attentiveness to the conversation, responding to what they're saying, not the chatter in your head of, oh my gosh, what's going on? Shifting the conversation. You can add on to what you're talking about or change topics, shift it slightly to something you both are engaged with. You're looking to discover a place of shared interest. Even if the shared interest is something on a surface level, you both love to go skiing, it helps to build a connection. And then third is you're passing back. This is when you're looking to further the conversation and open up to share more. So let's give it a practical example about this. Okay, first, matching. What did you think of the speaker? Fascinating. You know, you're kind of making the connection. Then you're talking about, oh, during my VISTA, I worked with urban charter schools. You know, what is the focus of your work? You're listening to them. So this is matching what they're saying, education, education. The next is you're shifting. They're talking about that they're researching teacher training programs. Now, you might not have done teacher training programs in rural areas, but you're listening to what they're saying. You're shifting slightly to charter schools. Then they say, oh, wow, I actually used to study charter schools, so you've shifted, and now you're passing back, kind of building a deeper connection. I'd love to hear more. Now, at this point, if you're at the red light of the conversation, it's really busy, this would be the opportunity to maybe say to them, I'm sure there's other people that you need to talk to here, interested in talking to you. Could we exchange information? I would love to follow up and hear about your key findings. Again, reading the conversation in the room. It's a really great tip. So feel free at this point to use the chat box to talk about some other ways that you've found to be effective in building your network. What other face-to-face events have been really effective for you? So while that's going and people are putting some, I'm sure, great ideas about events that they've used for face-to-face, I'm going to talk about conversation starters, because that often people are like, oh my gosh, I don't know what to say, I'm at loss. This is one of my favorites. So easy, 3 words. Tell me more. Just tell me more. What do you think? I'm new to this group. How long have you been a member? You know, what brought you here? What did you think of the speaker? You know, I see you work for that nonprofit. If it's on their name tag, what is your role there? Really easy. Hi, I'm Josh. Hi, I'm the name. What did you think of the speaker? There's a link at the bottom. The Muse has some great, brilliant networking conversation starters. But the thing that I want you all to leave with this regarding this, around conversation starters at these events, is if you notice, they're all simple questions. You don't need to have all the answers. I ran a workshop recently here at my university, and somebody said, well, I'm so new to the field, I don't know anything about this. We talked about how to get more information about the field, but just by asking people, oh, what is your interest area in this? What is your work? What is your research? By asking them questions, you are going to sound very engaged, and you're going to get to learn. So then the next time you go, you have more to offer somebody. Simple questions. Okay, so now we're talking about smart people thinking. This goes back to this concept about how you're building your alliances. I've said this before, and I will always emphasize this: be authentic. People can see through when people are not being authentic and engaged. So you want to try to figure out before you go to events how to feel authentic at the events. Make sure you're in a good mood before you go in. Take care of yourself. Wear the clothes that feel authentic to you. Find commonalities. Talked about super connectors and this whole concept of board of advisors. And then the one piece I really want to emphasize here is the concept of long-term. Some of these relationships that you build with people are going to be things that might not manifest itself for years and years down the road. We don't know. So if you're thinking about long-term, reciprocal, transformative relationships, that you might be planting lots of seeds that kind of manifest itself in different ways. So again, be really strategic and just thinking about this as a relationship. These are professional relationships. So the next piece fits in, actually saw a lot of people putting this into the chat box around kind of these meetings, these networking meetings. I'm a huge fan of them, huge fan in information gathering, aha moments. When you reach out to people, you want short and sweet emails. There's a lot of great research that talks about very clear subject line, very clear email. Don't start the email with, hi, my name is, but rather build the connection. Use your LinkedIn profile as your signature line so they can see how they know you. Short and sweet meetings. I recommend in that initial email you say to someone, I would love 15 to 20 minutes of your time. That feels much more manageable to somebody than even a half an hour. Usually they're going to allocate a half an hour on their clock, either they're talking to you on the phone, but it shows them that you really respect their time. And don't be concerned if you don't hear back from them after the initial email. If they just might be super busy. It's not, oh my gosh, they don't want to connect with me. Take the original email, hit reply all so it's in the bottom of the email. Say, dear Ms. Smith, I just wanted to send you a quick note to follow up on the message I sent 2 weeks ago. I'm sure things are busy right now for you, but would love to find a time to meet if you're available. All you need to do. You're being respectful of their time and you're jogging their memory. So make sure you follow up. Do your research. Please don't go in there and say, tell me about your career path. They're on LinkedIn, you know that. There are bios on their website. What's the mission of your organization? Don't do that. Really think about questions. They're going to help you understand. You might say, I saw on your LinkedIn profile you made a transition from here to here. I would love to know what was the impetus behind this and how you made that transition. They're going to view you in a different way when you ask the right questions. Remember, it is about them. Even though in your mind you might be thinking, oh my gosh, I really want to work at their organization, this is building a relationship. I had a networking meeting with someone recently who within 5 minutes was asking me about relationships I had that I could connect her with at George Washington University. It felt really uncomfortable to me and very off-putting to me. I didn't even know this person, and she was asking me to make recommendations for her. I needed to know, was she someone I was willing to put in the line with this? Have a hook. If you've done something interesting, if you are really working in something that's in their field, have something that's unique. If you can add in with an ask. At that point, at the end of the conversation, you might say, it was really interesting hearing about the work in that division within your nonprofit. I'm wondering if you would feel comfortable connecting me with someone there because I would love to have another conversation. So if you can, add with the ask, and then follow up with them. Figure out ways. We talked earlier on LinkedIn on how you can set up triggers to remind with people. You're going to send them a thank you note, obviously, at the end, but if there's ways, if it's someone you really like, set up a Google News alert. See if you can think about, set up a spreadsheet and say, okay, these are people I really want to follow up again. Oh, I heard about this event. Let me make sure that they know about this event, or I saw this article. Create ways for certain people, might not be everybody, where you can actually start to follow up with them. Thank you, thank you. You are not seeing double here. I put this here for a couple reasons. One, please, that night, send them a thank you note. I am incredibly amazed at the number of people who don't send thank you notes. If you want, send them additional follow-up handwritten thank you note. Make sure that they know you appreciate them. If they've suggested you meet with somebody else, send them a note when you schedule a meeting with the other person and say, thank you so much for suggesting I meet with John Smith. He and I are actually meeting next week. I really appreciated it. After your meeting with John Smith, circle back to the first person. We had this great meeting. I just want to thank you again. Not only are they seeing you as incredibly considerate and diligent, which is the kind of person they might want to hire, but it also creates 2 additional touch points. So you had your original thank you, the thank you when you're setting up the meeting with a person, and a follow-up, that if in that span of time they think of someone else for you to connect with, an event for you to go to, a job opportunity, you're more on their radar screen because you don't know how busy their schedule is. So as much as you can, create touch points, light touch points, to keep you on your radar screen. We're getting close to the end and getting ready for questions. Okay. So you've done all this great work, you've built this network, whether it's for a job, whether it's for a project you're working on, a grant. How do you sustain this? We just talked about this, inviting, connecting with others, sending links. LinkedIn is great for showing updates. Oh, this person got a new job, they got a promotion. Holiday notes. My boss here at the Trachtenberg School loves to send out Thanksgiving cards. So thinking about it in that way. Handwritten mail. You notice even with the word handwritten, it stands out. I love thank you notes that are mailed to me. It touches me. Find out about major events. Contact them. You might feel like, okay, you met with them, it's 5-6 months later, you're nearing your end of service, you might shoot them off a note and say, wanted to know, I'm going to be finishing up my national service in a couple months. I wondered if you might have some time to meet again or to talk again so I can just touch base and hear more about your work and get some advice from you. Building a long-term relationship. And you notice these are really early plants, you're planting seeds. So would love to use the chat box if you have questions, if you have ideas on how to actually, you've done to sustain your network, other really creative things that you felt have worked for you or people have reached out to you with that have been effective. So I want to go back to this and remind you, we talked earlier, remember when I talked about the way that we're wired for connection? Some of this is going to happen outside your comfort zone. So you need to do whatever you can to lean out of that comfort zone, because that is where the magic happens. Whatever you can do to figure out, how do I find authentic situations where I feel good about myself? What information do I need to know about myself in the field and my organization so I'm more informed? So when I lean out of that comfort zone, I feel better going into that place. Because the reality is, I love this quote, ships are safe in the harbor, but that's not what ships are built for. You might feel safe in the space that you're at, but that's not why you're here. You signed up to do a year or 2 of national, or even 3 of national service because of the difference you want to make in the world. And that difference in the world is not going to be made in the harbor. It's going to be made when you put up those masts, when you get at the helm and you start sailing your ship. You might have some rocky waters, some difficult times, but the view is going to be incredible. And the impact you're going to have is significantly greater when you are actually built out there and you're out at sea with your ship. So I encourage you to take that chance. It's going to make all the difference. And with that, we are going to move into Q&A.
Thank you so much, Denise, for all of the terrific information. You've given us some great strategies, ideas, things to think about. I know I'm going to go back to my LinkedIn profile and take a look to make sure that it's up to snuff. So we are going to get to your questions in just a moment, but before we do, I want to just let you know we've got an evaluation poll that we've opened in the right side of your screen. If you would please take a moment or two to share with us your feedback. We'd love to hear what you thought about today's session. If you have any additional thoughts about how we could explore this topic a little bit more in depth, or if you have feedback about how we can make our sessions better, and if you have suggestions for future topics, we'd love to hear those. So the poll is open there on the right. It'll be open through the rest of the session. But we do want to move into the Q&A portion. So now that the poll is open, your other boxes have closed up. So you can use a triangle that appears next to the Q&A, which is just above the evaluation poll, to open the Q&A box and type in your question there and then click the send button. So that way you can submit your question. We will queue them up and have Denise answer them. And I'm also going to invite Melinda, our operator, to come back and give us instructions for answering questions by phone. Melinda?
Thank you. At this time, to ask your question over the phone, please press *1. Please unmute your phone and clearly record your name when prompted. To withdraw your question, please press *2. Thank you. It'll be one moment, please, for the first question.
All right. And while we're waiting for questions to come in by phone, we've got a bunch of questions already lined up for you, Denise. So let's dive right in. First off, Denise, you mentioned a book that sparked a fair amount of interest among folks. The book you mentioned, Give and Take. Could you give us again the name of the author and maybe where folks could find more on that book?
Adam Grant is the author, and I mean, I think you can get it at any library And it's just a really interesting concept about how givers are more successful in the world than takers or connectors, which I think is really indicative of people who sign up to do AmeriCorps Vista. I think you all are givers, and there's just some really profound concepts in there that help me think. And it's interesting because I saw one comment in there about people, the range of people that are around Vistas, and I can't emphasize enough that so many of these concepts are so applicable to whatever age you are, whatever age you're working. I mean, I'm 20 years past my Vista service, and a lot of these concepts, and particularly in this book, really made me shift how I was thinking about how I was connecting with people and what I was offering people.
Terrific. All right, next up, Jackie asks, what if you're trying to move to a new city and it isn't very easy or efficient to travel to that locale very often before you move? How can you network and find jobs in a new city before you actually get there?
That's a great question. First, I do want to reference, if you search, I actually wrote an article, because I know this is a big issue with AmeriCorps alum. In my role as AmeriCorps alum career coach, if you look at the AmeriCorps alum website under professional development, I actually wrote a specific article on this, and there's lots and lots of resources in there, because I have done this. If anybody looks at my LinkedIn profile, that only tells half the story. I've moved around a lot. So just some really key things with this. One is a basic thing about a resume. Make sure it's at the top of your resume that you're relocating to an area. I just want to make sure that that's out there. One of the easy things to do is to talk to people who are in that area. Look at their LinkedIn profiles. Look at people who are in organizations that are super connectors in the organization. So, for example, I used to live in Boston. Boston Foundation does a lot of work around these indicators reports in, say, education and health. If you look at their reports, you see the people that are involved in those reports. That's going to help you identify who are the major players in the community. Then you can look at their organization site and LinkedIn to see who to talk to at that organization. It's really critical to reach out to the organizations to get an understanding of what's going on because, you know, as you know, every organization has very, very different culture. So that's one big thing. I mean, what's great is Skype and phone. When I moved to D.C., a lot of my initial networking was via Skype and phone, and particularly if someone can recommend you. So I would say really leverage the AmeriCorps and the Vista community, the Vista alum and AmeriCorps alum community, because these are people you're already connected with. You might send out a note to the AmeriCorps alum community or the Vista community in that area and say, I'm looking to get into with this organization. Are there some people you would suggest I follow? Start getting e-newsletters from the big players, maybe the United Way in the area, the hands-on network in the area, so you can start to identify, depending on what fields you want to be in, what are some of those organizations and players that are in there to make sure that you're tapping into all these resources. But again, if you go to that website, I list tons of different ways, like Chamber of Commerce, like lots of different resources for people to tap into to network there. The one other piece I would add on that, particularly when you are a younger professional, come up with, make sure you have a plan A, B, C, and D regarding this. It might be, plan B might be taking a stepping stone job, might be a job that isn't exactly what you want in the organization you really want to be in. When I moved from Connecticut to Boston, I spent about 6 months temping and working at a flower shop before I landed a job at Boston Cares up there. And what I had done, one of the best things when you move somewhere, I started volunteering for Boston Cares. And when the job came up, she actually said to me when she interviewed, she noticed who had signed up and was already volunteering with them before the job had been posted and who signed up to start becoming a volunteer with them after. And she noticed that I had been an active volunteer with them before. So there's a lot of different ways to think about how to leverage before, and then if you can't get the job and make the transition, to think about how to make sure it's a smooth enough transition.
All right, thanks. Lots of great suggestions there. Next up, Megan asks, what's the time frame from getting someone's business card to connecting with him or her on LinkedIn or through email? When is too late?
Nothing is ever too late, but I would say if it's been a long time, and I have certainly been in this situation. Actually, right now I'm looking at a stack of business cards on my desk right now, Megan. So we all do, and we all understand. If it's been a while, I will actually name that elephant in the room when I send them an email, and I might say, oh my gosh, I can't believe it's been 2 months since we connected at that conference. I am so sorry. I have been meaning to email you and follow up. So, of course, ideally, it's better to do it early failure. But if it doesn't happen, just name the elephant. Most people really understand in this world that those things happen, and it's completely fine. And just saying to somebody in the LinkedIn message, I have been meaning to email you. It was great to meet with you. I'm so sorry it took so long. I was really engaged in this. If you can say, you know, I was really engaged in this project in Vista. We were running this massive fundraising event. So if you can give some context, but if not, just kind of naming the elephant in the room and saying that, I think, is totally fine. Even another question, kind of a correlate to this, comes up is, what if you haven't been in touch with someone for years? And I'm going to use an example. I left Boston 5 years ago. I recently had one of my alum here at the school was transitioning to Boston, reached out to Common Good Careers, an amazing organization that does recruiting in the Boston area, to someone I hadn't been in touch with for 5 years. Sent him a note, gave the context. I said, I don't know if you remember me. We connected when I was up there, wanted to connect you to this alum of mine. He totally remembered me, was incredibly receptive. So sometimes people feel like it's been years since I've connected with someone that's part of my network. You know, what are they going to think? In most cases, people really are fine with it and understand and are completely receptive because they know you don't stay active with all of your networks at all the time. It's kind of an ebb and flow. So just understand that and be okay with that. And I always like to say, be permission to be human. Permission to be human with all of this. We all, you know, can't get everything at all the time and respond to every email, and that's just fine.
Good advice. Thanks, Denise. Melinda, let's turn to the phones and see if we have any questions on the phone line.
We are currently showing no questions, but as a reminder, press *1 for phone questions.
Okay, well, we've got plenty of other questions here. So next, Joey asks, I'm jumping ahead here. We'll get there next. Shannon asks, what is your stance on connecting with people on LinkedIn that are either working in a field or working at an organization where you would like to be one day, but this is somebody that you've never met face-to-face?
Great question, Shannon. Thank you. Again, kind of naming the elephant in the room. When you email them, saying to them, we've never met, but I'm really intrigued by your work. I'm really intrigued by your organization. Wanted to know if you would be open to having a conversation. I get these emails. I've sent these emails all the time. Again, in those situations, what you might want to try to do is use LinkedIn to see if you have a second or a third degree connection or somebody at that organization. So if you can ever get a warm contact and someone to make an introduction, it's even better. But if not, it's fine to do that. A couple things is, one, particularly when you're in national service, this is your way, kind of, people have such a respect for people who do national service. You could say, as an AmeriCorps Vista member, you know, I'm looking to explore fields. It kind of becomes this, a little bit more of an entree in. So that's, use that as much as possible. If there's a way for you to, in that email, to have a connection and say, you know, if say they're working in an organization that you have a connection to through some work you did growing up, or a personal connection, you might say, you know, my parents used to be a teacher and I'm really interested in the work you're doing at this charter school. Whatever you can do, again, remember, it goes back to that thing I said about having a hook. And the one thing I always like people to remember about this is when you're doing cold emails, your percent of return is obviously going to be lower, so don't get discouraged. Know that it is not you. This is not personal. It's just because people are overwhelmed. So don't get discouraged if you're getting a 30% response rate on something. But remember, if you typically, and that's kind of the norm, is 30% response rate often on those kind of cold emails, is that you would need to email 10 people to get 3 responses. So you need to email a lot of people, come up with a nice standard template, very, very short and sweet, asking for that time, show a link to your LinkedIn, show the professionalism, and follow up. And you would be amazed. Again, I could regale you with many stories about people who got opportunities like this with people that they'd never met before. And going back, remember that thing about receiving? People like to help. People tend to completely underestimate how giving other people are and want to help and support you.
All right, so here's a question that's related to LinkedIn, not so much specifically to networking, but Joey wants to know, can you make a LinkedIn page for the organization where you're working?
Oh, yeah, you can do that, but you want to talk to your organization about doing it. If you search under companies, all the organizations have LinkedIn pages. So you want to make sure that you're connecting with the right people at the organization, and that not only, particularly as a VISTA, as we always know, even 20-plus years later after I've done VISTA, I always remember you're building systems that should sustain themselves after you leave. So if you're creating a LinkedIn page for the organization, make sure you've created a system for someone else to sustain and update the page after you leave. Otherwise, it doesn't become an outdated feature. It's incredible to me after all these years how much of what I got as VISTA will stay with me. That's why I love this work, and I love giving these workshops. I believe so much in this.
Great. Thank you so much. Now, Catherine was paying attention when you shared the JobRight data, and she said back to the data on referrals, where 78% of recruiters, quality candidates come from referral. She said, my question is, how long is the relationship? Like, are referrals made for people with more than a year of a work relationship?
I don't think you can actually look back at that study. I don't remember seeing anything specific. I don't think they actually did that. And I'm going to give you an example, actually, of something that happened to me that just shows you how easily this happens. And again, the question when someone was asking about further along in the career, that this will happen easier a little bit further along in the career. But Liz Matthews, who runs VISTA Services over at the corporation, she and I barely knew each other. We're a fairly new relationship at that point. When I was moving to D.C., connected me with a friend of hers who was very high up at a university. I had a 20-minute call with this person who then said, I know someone that's a president of a university that's looking for someone to start a career services office. I'm going to send her an email for you. This note this woman wrote about me, and she had known me for 20 minutes through a connection with Liz Matthews, was beautiful, as if I really knew this person. Got the interview. It turns out I didn't want the position. It wasn't the right fit for me, but that was through very light touch relationships. She had seen my experience. We had had a conversation. So sometimes it can happen through that, and sometimes it's more significant relationships. Sometimes it's through just even a relationship at a school. My alumni are willing to go to bat and do a referral for other alumni at the school, even if they've barely met them, because of the relationship and they know that they're Trachtenberg School alum. We have that happen all the time. So you can look for and see if there's more detailed information, but from what I would say from my experience is it really can vary tremendously and still have very positive results.
Great. Now I'm going to turn back to Melinda and see if we have any callers on the phone line.
We're showing no phone questions.
Okay, great. Well, then we'll continue with the online questions. Next up, Marcella has a question more related specifically to VISTAs and VISTA service. So she says, when asked, who do I work for or what organization I'm with, how should I explain that I'm in transition and seeking a great career opportunity? Her particular VISTA service ends in 3 months.
So without knowing your specifics, Marcella, what I would, easily be able to say, I actually, if it was while you're in your VISTA position, you obviously can talk about that you're finishing up your year of national service in the organization you're with. If it's after your VISTA service, you can say, I actually just finished up my year of VISTA working at X organization, and I am exploring opportunities in the environmental science field, particularly in this area. Again, you don't want to say you're looking for a job, but you can say I'm exploring opportunities. People know it's code word for a job, but I'm interested in learning more about the field of food nutrition services, of obesity, things like that. So you can just say, I've just finished my year of national service. Again, if it's further along since you finished it, and you just talk about, I'm actually right now looking for opportunities and doing this and this. You don't really answer the question directly. But you still have 3 months, and you never know. You might find something great before the 3 months ends.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Julie says, are there any drawbacks to having people or groups in your network that are outside of your scope of future job interests? For example, people from past careers. Is there an ideal number of connections, or is it the more the merrier?
I like that question, Julie. Absolutely. I don't think there's any drawbacks to having it outside of your scope, because you never know who might have a friend whose roommate works in the organization you want to be in, or who's connected to somebody else who might be married to somebody else. So absolutely not. In this day and age, remember that whole thing about the active alliances. We don't know where people are connected, and remember, this is not about finding a job. This is about a career network. We don't know what these relationships might be and the impact of these relationships. Somebody might be inviting you to a conference that you hadn't ever thought about that's looking to bring someone in who comes from the space that you're working in. So, always being open to that. I think that there's an ideal number of close connections. You can't, I have a huge number of LinkedIn connections. Just because of my line of work, it just naturally happens because so many students want to connect with me. But in terms of that smaller group of kind of those allies and associates and alliances, much, much smaller, and I manage that differently because to me, again, it's so important about the authenticity of the relationship and kind of making sure you're aware of that. For some reason, this question just reminded me of something, and just make sure when you're doing things, if you're applying for a job and say you're currently in a job, because people on this call could be people who are, looking further down in their career or further along, and if you don't want people to know you're applying for jobs and you're working on, say, your LinkedIn or your Twitter, just make sure you're managing your settings on there so people don't know things that you're doing. If all of a sudden you're adding 20, 30, 40 connections to your LinkedIn profile and you don't want your colleagues to know you're looking for a job, and somebody notices that because they might be getting updates or notices all of a sudden you've added tons of groups, just be mindful to make sure the groups aren't showing up in your thing. If it's like groups for like a job search or things like that, just make sure you're managing all of that. But again, I don't think there's an exact number, but I think it's being mindful of who you are. Some people really just want to have a very small network, and that works for them. It really is such an individual decision that's based on an authentic connection. Knowing not everybody can be super close, but it's figuring out what works for you.
All right, great. Next up, Demi has a question about transitioning from one field to another. It says here, I'm a VISTA focused on STEM education, but I'm more interested in working in public health research. Do you have any advice for how to transition from one field to another?
This is where informational interviewing and networking is huge. Really, really huge. It really gives you an opportunity to connect with people who might be willing to give a chance for you. And that is really critical. A whole other question related to this that unfortunately we can't get into here, but it's really about like figuring out how to frame your resume, your LinkedIn, and your cover letter to focus on transferable skills. And again, I have to say I actually wrote an article on this also at that AmeriCorps Alum Professional Development section on transitioning fields like this. I talk a lot to people about how you can pivot, how you can identify stepping stone jobs where someone might take a chance on you, where you can leverage what you have and your transferable competencies into a new space that might be the closer space to getting, say, from going from STEM and education into public health. And I would guess there's some things within STEM and education that are very transferable to public health, but talking to people is going to be huge because then you're not going to be just a resume in the stack, but rather somebody who says, you know what, I know this person, we want to take a chance on them. Get connected at those organizations, within, going to networking events. Think about if there's additional educational opportunities, which are a great way to network. Are there specific certifications you can get? You can learn about this through networking with people and having informational interviews, as well as doing what I like to call deconstruction of people's career paths on LinkedIn. Look at their pathway. Look at the certificates. If you look at my LinkedIn profile, you will see I have a huge number of certificates that I have within the career development field to give me credibility in the space and knowledge and learning. So look at different ways. I always talk about how you can pivot and build your career is the 3 E's of career education. I add an extra E, and it's education, employment, and enrichment. And enrichment is your network. It's your pro bono work. It's whatever you can do to kind of leverage all of that to make a transition.
Great. And next up, Rockman has a question that I think maybe I'll be able to answer, but Denise would love to get your input as well. The question is, does AmeriCorps already have a LinkedIn page for the PSO that I attended? And if not, how would one go about creating it? If yes, how does one get included? I'm new to LinkedIn. So the short answer is we don't actually create LinkedIn pages for individual PSOs, but we do have a couple of LinkedIn pages where you can certainly connect. We've got our organizational company page, and we hope that you would update your LinkedIn profile to show your service with AmeriCorps Vista. We also have a LinkedIn AmeriCorps Vista members group that you can connect with as well. And we've got one for Vista alumni. So there are a couple of different ways that you can connect through LinkedIn to other Vista members and to Vista alumni. But to answer your question, no, we don't. There's really not a way for us to do individual pages for every single pre-service orientation. So Denise, do you have any other thoughts or ideas about connecting through LinkedIn?
That was great.
Okay, great. Let's see, here's the next question. I heard it's recommended to start applying for jobs 2 months before your Vista service ends. Is this true?
It's going to depend on your field and your line of work. So, for example, if you're looking at federal jobs and you get non-competitive eligibility for federal jobs, you absolutely need more than 2 months. I would say start looking at stuff about 6 months in advance for federal jobs. Often state jobs, any type of public sector jobs can often take longer. There's just more bureaucracy, also particularly if you're looking at any type of job that requires a security clearance. I'm working with a student right now that's already been about 6 months through an FBI background check security clearance, so be mindful of that. I actually think 2 months is not early enough because typically you're going to be hopefully interviewing about 2 months out before the end of service. So I would say, and again, for those of you who are nearing your end of service, please don't panic when I say this, but I would say you want to start actively applying for jobs about 4 months out, 4 to 5 months out, because you have to think about kind of backing into it. If they have all the applications when they review them. If you have 1 or 2 or even 3 rounds of interviews, then they offer you the job. Then you have the compensation negotiation, then some time off between when you finish your service in the job. So you be back into it. I actually don't think 2 months is early enough if you want something right after your service ends. But again, if you're less than 2 months, please don't panic with all of this. There's a lot of different stopgap measures that you can do. There's temp work that you can do. There's different opportunities for part-time work that would enable you while you're in between positions. But if you are closer to your end of service, you really want to turn the dial up. And again, remember, 50% of jobs don't get posted on the job boards. So you want to be tapping into your networks and that referrals, anything you can do to increase your odds.
Oh, yeah, good advice, and we hear that as well in the Vista office about just the search process and putting those feelers out and doing that word of mouth kind of networking that really does lead to more of the positions that are most interesting. All right. We've got time for a few more questions. Next up, Hannah says, do you have any advice for those of us social introverts who dislike large social settings and gatherings, but could suck it up if we needed to?
Great. I saw this question in the queue, and I was hoping we'd have time to get to this, Hannah. Thank you so much for asking this question, because this is a common one that I get on this list. For people who don't like large situations like that, I actually recommend that unless it's, a really relevant conference for you, this is not where you're going to feel your best, and it's not the best setting for you. There are going to be times where you're going to have to figure out how to manage that, say, for your job, and there's some wonderful books out there around the introverts and networking and the quiet, the strength of it, because there's so much value in the social introverts who I think in our society tend to devalue themselves. So I can't emphasize this enough. I would suggest, Hannah, for someone like you or other introverts on the call is one-on-one meetings are going to feel a lot better for you. And particularly as you're building your confidence, one-on-one meetings that are warm connections, not cold connections, but warm connections. Make sure if it's new for you, do whatever you can to build your confidence beforehand. There's a great video by Amy Cuddy, C-U-D-D-Y. She's one of the most well-known TED Talks around how to actually, there's power poses you can do to actually help lessen your stress and your nervousness before going into interviews. But also, again, going back to things that seem silly, but making sure you're feeling good before going into spaces. So you might need to feel more prepared for those individual meetings. again, even with the events, what I always recommend with that, even if you're going to an event, go to something that's topic specific. For you, better networking might be at an informational event, might be at a training. You might also, if you need to go to a large event, ask to volunteer, ask to be the person staffing something so you have a role. Take time for yourself. It's huge. You know, make sure you take breaks. I might, you know, come up as an extrovert on my Myers-Briggs. I actually don't love those huge events, so I will often leave and take a walk so I can come in and feel refreshed. To make sure you're doing a lot of self-care is huge for you. Also coming up with, and this actually research shows this, kind of if-then strategies. And this is true for everything. When you develop if-then strategies for situations, you are significantly more likely to stay on your goals. So you might say, if I start to feel overwhelmed, and think about this before you go into an event, then I will go to the bathroom, I will go to the bar, I will go take a walk, and I don't mean go to the bar, I mean go get a Diet Coke, you know, I'm not advocating for everybody to be drinking, but I'm saying come up with a plan. You know, it might be if I go with somebody, if I feel overwhelmed, if I feel nervous, I will go back to the person I came with. So come up with strategies that help mitigate the nervousness that you're feeling, and come prepared with them. This could be on an individual level, a group level, and think about strategies that work for you. Even if it's that your initial, say, networking meetings are done on the phone rather in person. It's all about finding what works for you and not feeling like something is wrong with it. There is, again, when you read this research, it talks about the value of the introvert in the workplace, their meaningful listening, you know, the role that they play that balances. There's a value for extroverts and introverts, and it's just kind of finding that authentic space for you.
Great. Thank you, Denise. Got time for just a couple more questions. Jordan has a question related back to the cold calls or the cold emails that you were talking about earlier, and asks, when should you give up hope on a relationship or a contact? You know, you sent the messages and you did the follow-up, but you received no feedback.
Typically, I would say 2 to 3 emails is enough. If you're not hearing them after 2 to 3 emails, you need to let it go. I wouldn't ever want you to give up hope because you might actually connect with this person another time. We don't know what's going on in their lives. It is so easy. We all like to create stories, and we go very easily. We all humans have a negativity bias where we tell, you know, it's just our tendency to think, to go to that place. We don't know what's going on. We don't know if they were on vacation when we got their email, they sent their email and they never sent it out of email box, and by the time they got back, it was on the 8th page of their emails, and they just totally forgot about it. We don't know what's going on, if they have something on at work or personal. So you never ultimately want to give up hope because you might run into the person. You also don't want to ever take it personally. It's nothing to do with you, or very, very, very rarely is it anything to do with you, you know. Most cases it's just the person's overwhelmed or they don't have time. You don't know when you're going to meet them in a different context. But on a pragmatic level, if you've done 2 to 3, if it's somebody you really want to reach out to. Another little trick I often tell people is, if say you sent out 1 email to somebody and you really, or 2 emails, and you really want to reach out a 3rd one, call them super early in the morning, about 7:45 in the morning on their work line. They're not going to, very rarely someone going to be there, so you do need to be prepared if they're going to be there, just in case. And you might leave a message and say you were calling me and say, hi Denise, I just wanted to try to reach you, thought maybe I would catch you first thing in the morning in case you were coming in. I just wanted to follow up on the email that I sent, you know, on November 1st regarding my interest in connecting with you. I'm just going to send you another note later on today. By doing a voicemail, nobody ever calls people. You're going to grab their attention, and you're going to get them noticed. And most likely, if they've been available and they were just overwhelmed, they're going to take your original email, send you a note, and say, I'm so sorry, I've been really overwhelmed. Let's find a time to get together. So that's a little trick, to call them super early, say, I just thought maybe I would catch you, but do be prepared just in case they are in the office. So it's just a little fun trick I recommend.
Great. These tips and tricks are really, really helpful. Monica has a question around non-competitive eligibility. She asks, if we get federal non-competitive status, how does it kick in if I'm applying 6 months early? I heard that the non-competitive status doesn't kick in until your year is complete. And I'll start answering this. You're absolutely right, Monica. It is true. You have to finish your year of service. in order to earn that non-competitive eligibility status. But if you're applying for federal positions before the end of your service year, in your cover letter and in your USA Jobs resume, you can indicate that you will be eligible for non-competitive status as of a certain date. It puts, the day after your VISTA service ends. So that way the hiring authority will see that they could be bringing you on using a non-competitive hiring method. It has great benefits for them as the hiring authority and for the organization. They can cut through a lot of red tape and bring you on a lot quicker. Obviously, it has wonderful benefits for you if you could be considered almost as an inside candidate without having to go through the whole exterior job pool. So you're right, you don't actually get the status until you finish, but you can let them know that you will be having it and give them a date when that will kick in. Denise, do you have any thoughts to add about federal job search or non-competitive status?
No, just the one thing I would say is there's a lot of great resources out there for federal job search. It can be an overwhelming process, but try not to allow yourself to get overwhelmed with it, because despite everything that I hear with people getting frustrated with it, there are jobs out there, and I know of people who've gotten jobs there. So just be prepared for the process. Take the time to do an incredibly thorough resume. There's amazing tools out there for that, and know that the possibility does exist.
All right. Well, that actually wraps up all of our online questions. I'm going to turn one final time to Melinda, our operator, to see if anybody's on the phone line.
And we're showing no phone questions.
Okay, terrific. So I want to take this time to thank you all for participating today and say a special huge thanks to our presenter today, Denise Riedman. Denise, you've shared so much terrific information and given us lots of very practical tips that we can all apply to whatever it is that we're doing or whenever our job search gets underway. I also want to invite everybody to come back with us next month for our next webinar, which is Writing Winning Proposals, Advice from an Experienced Grant Reviewer. That'll be on December 16th, 2 o'clock Eastern Time. Watch your inbox for an email invitation, and please do register. So thanks for everyone's participation today. We hope to see you all again soon.